So we're going to get started here. Just want to welcome everybody to Admitted Students Week. This is our faculty panel titled Our Faculty, Passion, Purpose, and Finding Your Path. And so thank you for those of you who are attending live. And for those of you who are watching the recording, we're super excited that you are here. My name is Josh Walehwa, and I serve as the Director for Career Services at the Brownson at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'll be serving as the facilitator for this panel. And you should choose us. You should definitely come here. It's what the script says, so I'm just going with the script, but I believe it too. You should definitely come to the Brown School. So now that that's out of the way, I want to make sure that we get a chance to introduce our panelists. All right, so our first guest is Ross Bronson, who is the Stephen H. and Susan U. Lipstein Distinguished Professor. With 13 years at the Brown School, Dr. Brownson focuses his work on chronic disease prevention through environmental change, evidence-based public health, and dissemination and implementation research. Of course, you should really consider taking are the Translating Epidemiology and in Policy and Evidence. I'm sorry, I'll say that one more time. Translating Epidemiology and Evidence-Based Public Health. Thank you, Dr. Bronson. Our next guest is Molly Metzger, who is the Senior Lecturer and Chair of the Social and Economic Development Concentration for our Master of Social Work program. With 9 years at the Brown School, Dr. Metzger's focus is on fair and affordable housing, social policy, and segregation and inequality. Courses, again, that you should consider and be getting excited about are fundamentals of community organizing and domestic and social and economic development policy. Next panelist is Sarah Moreland-Russell, who serves as Assistant Professor of Practice. With 14 years at the Brown School, Dr. Moreland-Russell focuses on public health and social welfare policy, dissemination and implementation research, child well-being, tobacco control, and obesity prevention. Some of her courses you may want to consider are influencing policy implementation, advanced policy analysis, legislative policy making, advocacy and analysis, and foundations of health policy and management. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Our next panelist is Vetta Sanders-Thompson, who is the E. Desmond Lee Professor of Racial and Ethnic Diversity. With almost 13 years at the Brown School, Dr. Thompson focuses on cultural competence, racial identity, disparities in health and mental health services, implications of race and ethnicity, and access to health. You should consider her courses in social justice and human diversity and interrogating health. And last but not least is Jean-Francois Trani. Jean-Francois is the Associate Professor and Chair of the Global Health Specialization for our Master of Public Health program. With 9 years at the Brown School, Dr. Trani focuses on mental health, disability systems dynamics, and international social work. Courses you definitely want to consider with him are program implementation and evaluation, global health, and global health, power, and politics. Just want to say thank you to all of our faculty guests. We're really excited to have you on here. So the way this is going to work this morning is I have a series of questions that I'm going to ask our faculty panelists, and we'll kind of go through those pretty randomly, and then we'll make sure to leave some time aside for you all who are in attendance to ask questions. We'll probably use our chat features depending on, it seems like it's a pretty nice sized group here. So we'll want to use our chat features, and I'll try to pay attention to that. If our colleagues on the call want to pay attention to that from admissions, please let me know as well. So let's just kick this off here. So I'm going to start by posing this question to Sarah. Sarah, how do you define the problem you're working to try to solve?
Morning, everyone. You should definitely come to the Brown School. How do I define the problem that I'm trying to solve? So I am a professor of practice, which means the research that I do is applied research. And so most of the research that and actually most of the research at the Brown School, I would say for policy research anyway, is applied research. But, you know, when we, especially in tobacco control or obesity prevention or even child well-being, we look at gaps in a system, right? We see how a system may or may not be operating if there's health inequities created, if there's sort of, major morbidities or more happening in populations, and then look at that system and see if there's breaks in that system. And so, a lot of, I think, Brown School faculty look at systematic research and the system as a whole, and look at problems and gaps in that system to define the problem and really understand it. And so that's sort of a broad, I think, definition of how I do so, but I think just generally that's how we approach it here.
Thank you, Sarah. Vetta, I'm going to tee that one up to you as well. So how would you define the problems that you're working to try to solve? I know you have a background that, like many of our faculty, that crosses the lines between social work and public health. And so, I'm curious to hear your answer.
Well, interestingly enough, my disciplinary background is psychology. And I think even though I work primarily in social work and public health now, that colors the way that I approach problems. And the problem that has always intrigued me, and I joke with people, this started during my undergraduate career, is how we talk about, how we define, and for the work that I'm interested in, most importantly, how we measure race, racism. We use these terms quite frequently, but what you realize after a while is, especially if it's your research, is that the definitions that we use, how we define race, who defines race, which is particularly important, and then it extends into racism and the multiple layers of racism, the types of racism, and then attempting to understand its true impact. And I don't think we fully realized or captured the true impact, and some of that is around our measurement. And so I do a lot of work in those areas, discuss those things, but also discuss the impact. And one of the things that I really became concerned about is that while the economic and social focus is extremely important, there was a period of time when people failed to recognize the psychological and the personal impact that racism has on individuals, the toll it takes on their sense of self, their well-being, their identities. And so I'm still, despite, and I will just say many, many decades, I'm still grappling with many of those issues and problems.
Thank you, Vetta. Yeah, I can understand that these are issues that are very complex. I'm glad we have people like you who are focused on coming up with the questions to address some of these really important issues. I'm going to switch it up a little bit here and put this one up to Molly and to Ross. And so Molly, I'll start with you. What's an experience in your life that drove you to your area of focus and research?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So I'll say quickly what that area is. So I also am very much focused on structural racism and especially how it has manifested in the realm of housing. So who, what are the rules of the game? Who is able to live where? Who's able to build wealth? How has the history of racism structured that over the course of generations, but also how do current policies, continue to perpetuate those patterns? And then the quick question, of course, is like, how do we interrupt those things? And who needs more power and who needs to be in decision-making roles so that we don't just continue to recreate the same problems? Okay, so to answer your actual question, Josh, in terms of some of the, the ways that I got involved in this work, one kind of key moment for me was actually in graduate school. So I grew up in a very disproportionately white, pretty affluent Chicago suburb. Definitely didn't learn about redlining in high school or even really in undergrad. It really wasn't until grad school, and which is awful, like in and of itself, that we don't teach the history of structural racism in most of our schools. But in graduate school, I was able to work with a public housing development in Chicago. One of my advisors at Northwestern, Mary Patillo, introduced me to an organization that was fighting gentrification on the north side of Chicago. And that's when I really started to see, sort of firsthand and get to make relationships with people who were fighting to preserve their community. And it kind of became like more real for me and less academic. And so I think that was one of the turning points in my life, and where I really also made the switch, not just from thinking about this like in an academic, sitting and reading about it kind of thing, but really started thinking, trying to think more creatively about how my work connected to activism and organizing.
Thank you, Molly. That's very powerful. I think there's plenty of people on the call who can connect with either having a personal experience or an exposure that really opens up a whole new world of and passion. And you've done it so well here in the St. Louis area. Ross, I want to give you the same question. What experience drove you to focus on your area of research or anything else?
Good question, Josh. And good morning, everyone. It's, picture yourself in a room together. We would be having coffee and maybe some healthy snack. It's great to see all of you and see your faces. I hope we see you all late summer and fall coming in. I think there's three things that sort of relate to the last question, but more specifically this one, Josh, about my own experiences. I took a kind of a non-traditional path to make it to academia. I did a PhD in environmental epidemiology. So I often call myself a recovered epidemiologist because epidemiology studies too much of what diseases are happening, but not enough about what to do about them. And so my work in 8 years in a state public health agency really shaped the issues I want to work on a lot. And that is, how do we more rapidly move evidence that we know would make a difference in people's lives into practice more effectively and more efficiently. And that involves, so that was my experience working in a state health department, seeing where it wasn't always doing that. A lot of our work now within the various projects and the centers that I work with are working in disadvantaged communities. So a lot of what drives my work is what the community says needs to happen. Not that too often academic research is driven by the academic researcher and not by the people actually affected in most need. And as Vetta and Molly just were talking about, that involves racially diverse communities, it involves low-income communities. We've done a lot of work in Latin America where there are the same large inequalities that there are here in the United States. So that is also, always trying to hear the voice of the people, the clients, whatever the type of work we're doing who are in need and can tell us what really needs to happen in their own settings. And then I guess sort of personally, I grew up being very active. Physical activity was a big part of my life. So a fair amount of my sort of content area research has been around physical activity and promoting physical activity and learning how to reach communities that are not getting enough physical activity, because it's one of the largest preventable risk factors. So I could go on, Josh, but I'll stop.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate kind of that pivot in your career as you learned a little bit more about what you really got into and started advancing towards really addressing some of these issues. Jean-Francois, you're on now, and I want to ask you a question about kind of your backstory. Why did you come to the Brown School? Why did you choose the Brown School? You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here and having this discussion with all of you. So why did I chose to come to the Brown School? Well, and that's probably linked to what we will talk next about, what are the qualities you need to have to work in the field of international social work and global health, around questions of development and fighting poverty globally. I think it was the combination of an opportunity and freedom. Opportunity because I happened to put my CV on the American Public Health Association website, and one of our nice colleagues saw it and said, "Hey, we just built this public health program. We need global health. Would you be interested to apply?" And the second, very important, is freedom. The idea that, unfortunately, where I was on the other side of the pond, as we say in Europe, at the university in London, I was not allowed to go to Afghanistan and continue my research there, where I've been working for now over 17 years. And the first thing I asked the dean during the interview was, am I allowed to go anywhere and do the kind of research I love and I want to do? And he said, yeah, of course, you're free. So these were the two main, really reason for my choice. So we are free to research whatever topic we want to research, which is very important for me.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. Opportunity and freedom. So Molly, I'd like to ask you the same question. I know I'm coming right back to you. Apologize for the short break, but what made you choose to come to the Brown School?
No, I'm glad that you asked, because I was just about to type something long in the chat. That I always say that my two favorite parts of this job are, one, the students, working with students who are so inspired and energized, and then two, like the freedom, the intellectual freedom to pursue the questions that we think are most pressing. And in terms of why I came here initially, so my background is actually, my undergrad degree is in women's studies, and then my PhD is in social policy. So especially through the policy program, I had been spending a lot of time with economists and sociologists. The sociologists, you don't have to apologize so much for having a social justice bent, but the economists will really, let you hear it if they think that you are biased. But, guess what? Everybody's biased. The economists are biased. Like how, what are the values that bring us to the questions we think are worth asking? And in social work, we have a code of ethics that squarely positions us, with respect to these big social problems that we've all been talking about. You don't have to apologize for that. You have to do it. It's part of the, reason that social work exists. And so, and once you start, using empirical methods, of course, we're all being rigorous and trying to hold ourselves to high standards in terms of our research. But in terms of, having a strong, sort of values orientation, anti-racist, social justice orientation, you don't have to apologize for that here. It's really a breath of fresh air. So for me, being, in an interdisciplinary place where I could still, spend time, have thought partnership with policy oriented people, but also have interactions, relationships with social workers who really have their feet on the ground, was a really exciting mix for me.
Thank you, Molly. So Vetta, I want to ask you this next question, which is, what's your favorite course to teach and why?
Wow. It's probably the best answer is I love teaching all of my courses, but if I have to pick a favorite, is my interrogating health course. Because we get to have interesting, wide-ranging discussions with students, guest lecturers that we bring in. We are covering topics from, sexual health policy, drug and pharmaceutical pricing. We look at the history of experimentation, particularly as it pertains to Black bodies, the history of segregation in the healthcare system, a topic that people rarely discuss, although it extended far beyond segregation and education. And so students bring so much knowledge and experience to the discussion. We always every year we end up discussing things that have not come up in years prior. And then we work with community organizations. All the students are doing placements with these organizations, and they're learning from the people in the organizations and bringing that back to the classroom. So it's just amazing to figure out what's going to happen this year.
Thank you, Vetta. As I asked that question, I realized it's almost like asking somebody who's their favorite child. I have one, so that's an easy answer for me, but that could be complex for some of you. Ross, I want to ask you that same question. Who's your favorite child? Student? No, what's your favorite course to teach and why?
That's so funny, Josh. I was just thinking that same thing. It is a little like my favorite child question. I think the answer would be what Vetta said. I love all the courses I teach, and thinking about the various courses I've taught over my career, which is sort of a decades kind of story, like Vetta said. I think the one now is the translating epidemiology into policy, because it lets me still bring a little bit of my early training in epidemiology into the world, but it also really is, it's really more of a policy class than an epidemiology class. It's basically, how do you do evidence-informed policy making? And Sarah comes into class. She's one of my guest speakers. We bring in a state legislator, Brian Williams here from the local community. He's a state senator. I bring in people who do like global infectious disease all the way down to trying to change local housing policy, you know, like Molly would do. So that course is really fun. It's kind of a combination of sort of the analytic parts of policy and policy analysis, but more about real world opportunities. And what I try to do in that course is get the students thinking about, even if they're never going to go run for a state legislative job or, you know, go work as a staffer in the US Congress, everybody has to play some role in the policy process. Everyone has to be involved in some form or another. And that's usually not a hard sell for our students, but so even if someone's a biostatistician, they can still play a role in the policy process. And so everyone needs to, as a citizen, as someone who cares about social work and public health and policy. And, you know, that's kind of the light bulb I try to get all the students to come in, because they come from very different backgrounds and interests. So I think that's the main one I'd call. Josh, thanks.
Thanks, Ross. If I could return back to school, I would take that class, but I'm not going to do it. Sarah, we're going to switch it up a little bit here. We're going to move forward. And, you know, this is a little different, but we will talk about, you know, how have the changes in our country or in the world in the past year affected the way you approach or think about your work and your research?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot, I would say. You know, I have a PhD in policy, and I actually teach a lot of the policy courses, and like Ross, really try to instill a sense of involvement in the policy process, involvement, you know, whether it's as a researcher or as an advocate or as someone developing policy. I think that that's really, really important and something that anyone in public health or social work should really be involved in. And so, you know, this past year couldn't sort of echo, you know, that approach more. I think all of the public health and social work students and faculty and anyone working in public health has had to respond in some way, either to, you know, global pandemic, to Black Lives Matter, to some of the issues going on with gun control and police brutality and you know, issues that are creating sort of health inequities and health disparities, you know, across the nation right now and across the globe. And so, you know, in my work, in my classes, I've actually, you know, implemented, I think, several sort of focused classes on looking at the COVID policies as a response to COVID-19 and how they support and sort of try to help people access food, people sort of survive through this epidemic, and, you know, making sure they get vaccinated and looking at even, you know, mask requirements across the states and things like that. And so, you know, because, you know, we are policy professor, I am a policy professor, and most of them on this call and this faculty panel are, we're constantly responding to changes. And this year, I think, was, you know, a big, you know, change across a lot of public health and social work issues, but we are constantly responding, I think, and adapting our work to sort of meet the challenges that are going on in the United States on a regular basis. And I think our work, our teaching, our research sort of exemplifies that across the Brown and School and Program of Public Health here.
Thank you, Sarah. Jean-Francois, I want to ask you the same question. How have the changes to our country or the world altered how you approach or think about your work?
Thanks, Joshua. I think the main thing I would add to what Sarah already mentioned in terms of research, has been to confirm, because of a limitation, actually in teaching as well, of a limitation of movement, has been to confirm my deep belief, and more than a belief, my perspective, that if you want to promote development, and when I say development, I mean better well-being and livelihoods for populations in countries where people, a lot of people with less than $2 per day, you need to build local capacity. And if we take the example of Afghanistan, where I've been working for so long, what I noticed since the fall of the Taliban is the difficulty of all these international experts to transfer their knowledge, their skills to the local population. So I built a few years ago a group of local researchers. I didn't build. We built together. They asked me to support them, and I've been bringing in researchers from all over the world to support them, with this idea that now that we can't even come that often anymore, and it might last for some time, we need to have this local capacity to police, to inform private sector companies with local know-how, local brain. And so that has been central now to my work. And so I try to bring in students who are interested in international social work and global health to really think along those lines, that everything you learn in our school should be transferred while they are doing their job locally to the local population. And so they teach and they train locally people.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. Very smart approach. So I'm going to transition to the next question here, and this one's for Vetta. So Vetta, what's been the hardest part of trying to teach and work through this pandemic for you?
The hardest part. Well, I think it's not, for me, it really has been not being able to be in person in several of my courses. I fortunately was able to teach in person in the fall, but I also taught online. And there's just a level of interaction, discussion. I think over time, we're doing a better job. I've certainly become much better at utilizing Zoom and all of its features, and pairing Canvas and its features with Zoom. But there are just, there's a level of engagement that I don't think you can mimic online. And that's been hard, because I realized so much of who I am in the classroom is driven by that interaction with students. In addition, some of our ability to have students engage in our community and the richness of that experience, they're doing it, but some of it is online, and you don't get that day-to-day interaction with your sites, and that's hard too. Needless to say, I will be so happy when we're all vaccinated and back face to face.
Yeah, I heard a lot of, hands up for that one, So we're not a religious institution, but amen. Anyway, we're going to move on. Molly, I want to ask you the same question. What's been the hardest part for teaching and working through the pandemic?
Oh, okay. Well, you said teaching. I was afraid you were going to ask me that question, because for me, it's really been the personal impacts of the pandemic on my family and my community. And that, just makes everything in the, I guess when it comes to my work, everything in the background of my work, just more stressful. The economic side of the crisis. So, well, I could go on and on about the wave of evictions that we're facing now if we don't do better on the housing front. And that's affected people I know personally. And also the stress, like the economic, the disconnection. has had all of these impacts on, like Vetta was saying, the psychological side of things. It's like the social and economic are not divorced from the psychological and the personal. And in a city that's already as stressed as St. Louis is, that manifests itself in violence. It's just been a really hard year. I am really proud in terms of how it shows up in teaching. I was going to share, I'm very proud of this. Don't watch it now because we're in the middle of a conversation, but if you want to watch it later, a video that some of my students made doing, community engaged work during the pandemic. So we're figuring it out, we're making it work. But just the level of stress has been really high. And I guess I'll just, rather than ending on a depressing note, I'll just end on like a note of gratitude. I really think, the students are community partners for sure. And, all my colleagues, everyone has really been trying to be as creative as we can be to do our work effectively and to solve the problems that are more pressing than ever. And I think that some of those lessons will actually like serve us well when someday this pandemic ends.
Thank you, Molly. And even though, the message is hard to hear, it's also a strong call for the people on this call who are looking into fields like social work, public health, and social policy, that we need you to be out there doing this work to address these issues. These are real issues that are continuing to this day. So I'm gonna switch it up a little bit here and move this one over to Sarah. So Sarah, what is a great piece of advice you were given in your career?
Gosh, I've been given a lot of great advice. I think one of the greatest pieces that I still, I think, strive for and try to do every single day is work on something that you're passionate about and love, and work with the people who share that same passion. Your work, will sort of speak volumes, right? Because if you're passionate and you actually love what you do, because let's face it, we are at, work a majority of our life. I do have a personal life. I have children, that's a stress too. But I do a lot of work, but I love what I do, and so taking that time to do my work, even when it's sometimes away from my family, I feel enriched by. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly engaged, and it just makes you want to continue your work and your passion throughout your career. And so I always actually say that to my students. They, especially since I work in the policy spectrum, they never know exactly which part of the policy process, for those who are specializing in policy, that they actually want to be engaged in. If it's academia, if it's teaching, if it's advocacy, if it's, at a think tank, something like that. And I always tell them, try as many jobs as you can. And the ones that you don't like, that those aren't the ones for you, right? Running for office, right, Molly? Yeah, or being a staffer in the Senate. So, my philosophy is love what you do. And if that takes you, years to figure out what it is, that's okay too, because you're only using those previous experiences to know what you really are passionate about and what you really love to do. And I just instill that into my students all the time. It's okay if you don't like your first job. Just know that you'll never want to do that again, and you can move on and find what your true passion is. And so I think that's probably some of the best advice that I've ever received. And really at the Brown School, they do give you that freedom to pursue your passion and pursue what you enjoy. And as you can see in my long list of research, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I love, because policy is my love, I love to jump to different topics and love to explore different avenues. And I'm given that freedom, and that really helps me be passionate about my work too. So.
Thank you, Sarah. Ross, I want to ask you the same question. What's one great piece of advice that you received in your career?
So great question. And I think I'll think about it as advice, and then maybe some lessons I've learned about maybe not doing it as well as I could have or should have, and maybe a combination of those. I think definitely everything Sarah just said would be top on my list. I think, really thinking about, one thing I've learned is that we need to take our work very seriously, but don't take ourselves so seriously. In other words, be humble about our work and not think of an academic person with all these fancy labels after our name, that we know more than the rest of the world. And so really be humble about what we know and what we don't know. I think that's a really important thing that we can all strive to do better at. I think, you know, as you get to be a leader and a manager, and some of you will be running agencies, running NGOs, working other teams of people, it is hire the passionate, committed, bright people that Sarah was just describing, and then turn them loose and try to, you know, the saying about, you know, reflected glory always shines the brightest. Make sure that they're out there in the limelight and they can learn from what they're doing and working as a team. And then I guess two other things I'll say quickly. One is, think of the role of mentors in your career and how that can help you and have helped me through my career. But don't think of just mentoring as one sort of skill set. You might have someone who mentors you about, you know, your path in life, or, you know, career decisions you make. Some might have the technical skills that you might want to learn. Others might think about job negotiation. Others might think about, how do I do this work-life family balance thing and do it better? So think about sort of a network of mentoring, not just a single person, and develop those over a career. And so you stay in touch with people who you value and can learn from. And then I guess the last one would be, and this is basically is epitomized by the people on this, our faculty here, is learn how to work outside the health sector. I'm a health person, I'm a public health person. Most of the gains we're going to make in public health are not going to come from health. They're going to come from things like, you know, city planning and agriculture and housing and the justice system and all those sectors that you wouldn't naturally say are health sectors, but are where social determinants happen and are the things that really determine people's path in life and whether they have a fair shot at being healthy. And so I think that's also something that is a really valuable thing. And sometimes it takes a different skill set than what we learn if we're trained as a medical person or a public health person or a social worker. So I think that would be the last one that I would mention.
Thank you, Ross. I'm going to do something a little different here, and I'm going to actually add a third person to this. Vetta, would you also share with us a great piece of advice that someone has given you in your career?
The best advice that I received was at the beginning of my career, and I was told, you can learn something from everyone and you will learn something everywhere. Don't stop talking to people. Don't ever treat people as if you know more or you know best. And it was so simple, but I think so profound, and it has been something that I have found to be true throughout my career. Chance conversations on the street with people have resulted in ideas or information and knowledge about what was really affecting their lives, but also just learning sometimes to sit down, be quiet, and just see where life and conversations are going. It really is a innovation.
I needed to hear that today, especially to sit down and be quiet, Josh. So I appreciate that. All right, Jean-Francois, I want to ask you this next question, which is what qualities are needed most for those people wanting to enter into your field?
You're muted, Jean-Francois.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. So I'm going to focus on the global part of it, right? Because I won't be able to talk about the US, but the world, the jobs in the global sphere are shifting considerably, and so not only with the pandemic, but it has been shifting in the last decade about with the development of skills by the population we're working with, so local experts, because they also have access to online training. And so I think more and more we need to be able as young professionals to bring something that some knowledge maybe that still is valid. So we still need to be able to be relevant. And eventually we won't be, right? These jobs will disappear completely because, well, there will be local capacity, and then it will be cooperation. And I think cooperation will be the next frontier. How do we develop a world that is more sustainable, more just, reduce inequities, and working, you know, in good understanding and collaboration across borders. And so the qualities that this require is definitely humility. We talked about it, but it's also, as Vetta mentioned, being open to different culture, different experience. We actually don't know anything. You will learn a lot, and what you will learn is that you don't know anything. When you arrive in a new context, you need to read, you need to listen to people, you need to try to understand what explains the situation in which they are, and what could be your contribution. So humility, opening of, you know, of mind, curiosity are essential. And then to find a job, it's going to be grasping any opportunity you have, maintain a network, so be open to opportunities, grasp anyone you can find, and from there, because and humility will bring the attention of colleagues, of managers, of other organizations that will say, hey, we need you for this new job, are you available? And so working outside your own country, which is what I mentioned by working globally, means, yes, this capacity of this flexibility, this humility, this mind opening, to be able to do it effectively and do no harm. That's the first thing I teach my students. We must not do any harm to the people where we work. I hope that responds to your questions. I went to be in a tangent.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm going to combine the last two questions for everybody to answer. So this is the last one, and we're going to save a little time at the end for some questions from our audience. So all of you have been at the Brown School for a good amount of time, and you've worked with so many students in various capacities. And so my question for you is, as you're speaking to potentially income, well, all of these students are coming to the Brown School, everybody watching at home, on recording, et cetera. So we know that. So since you know that for a fact, what is one piece of advice that you would give for an incoming student?
I'll go, Josh. So as you can see, most of the faculty here are very transparent, and that is true across the faculty at the Brown School, and they are accessible. And so if you are interested or passionate, or you think you might be interested in a topic, go and seek that faculty member out and get on their radar, because we are all doing work, we are all doing research, and we are all happy to have a student that is interested in the work that we do sort of join along with us. And so, you know, make this, you know, not only about coursework, but also about experience, and really take advantage of the amazing faculty. I mean, just being invited to be on this panel with the faculty that are on here today, I'm actually honored. And so, you know, we have amazing faculty at the Brown School. Seek them out. We are accessible, and always happy to work with our students. So that's my advice.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Ross to go next.
I think it would be this time in your lives, you know, most of you will be at the Brown School for 2 years. It's going to go so quickly, and it's really a precious time in your life. Very few people in the world get a chance to get a master's degree, to be trained in a graduate school, to be trained in the group of peers you'll have, the faculty you have, the quality of the staff we have at the Brown School. So I think just realize how it's going to feel like it's going to just blitz by in a few minutes, and make the most of the time when you're here, building those networks, getting to know people, you know, really building up what will be a series of lifelong connections to your students and to your faculty, colleagues, and to many of the staff that you'll work with. And so just, I think it's making the most of that time.
Thank you, Ross. Jean-Francois.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, I do totally agree with everything that has been said. Come out and let us know if you want to work with us. We have plenty of projects and we are happy to collaborate. I will add one thing, is be critical. Critical thinking is central. We discussed that before, Josh, when you talked in my class. You need to question everything we are telling you. Of course, I'm not, or I was an economist, I'm not anymore. I believe in social justice, but I know that students or professors in economics will criticize and say, well, the trickle-down effect does work. If we are more wealthy in a country, it will benefit everyone. My perspective is different, although I will present both of them in class. You will choose one. You have to be able to argue and to critically think about every perspective. So you need to work hard, read everything that comes between your hands. And if there are too many readings, doesn't matter, read as many as you can, talk with people, respond, argue in class, propose a different perspective, because that's how the world will make progress.
Thank you. High call for strong education, especially higher education. Molly, you're up next.
So the previous comments, you guys all took what I wanted to say, but I think one more thing I would add was really reach out to one another. And there are formal ways that you can be supported in doing that. So we have a pretty new, I think, peer mentoring program where you can connect with second-year students, but also informally. So, I mean, there are so many decisions to make along the way in terms of your area of concentration, what classes you're going to take. For social work students, you have your, where are you going to do practicum? And absolutely the faculty are here to support those decisions, but often for first-year students, second-year students can be really great sources of information. So if you need, I mean, even over the summer, if you want to connect, let us help you make those connections so that you can start hearing it from a student perspective.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you. Vetta, take us home.
Well, everything I think has been said. So what I'll leave you with, one, I echo Professor Trani. We are not here to tell you what to think. We're here to help you access information and think about how you want to think. But the one thing that hasn't been said is, if you're thinking about the Brown School, also think about St. Louis. Despite what is written, St. Louis has its negative points, yes. But I'm not a native St. Louisan, and I've remained here. St. Louis is an interesting community. It's a wonderful place to learn and grow. And you can make a lot of friends that will be with you for a very long time, even if you leave St. Louis. It's a good place to do social work, public health, and lots of other things, but it's also a good community with good people. You'll love it.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. I want to make sure that I leave the last bit of time for any questions. You can post your questions in the chat, and we'll see if we can get them to the faculty. It's interesting too, because many of our students come from outside of the St. Louis region. And, I can imagine a lot of these faculty that you're seeing, and even the administrators on the call, are from outside the St. Louis region, and we've chosen to stay here. And that I want to just lift that up, that this is such a great town. And I can say my hometown of Garden Grove, California is awesome, but I know that we have chock full of problems too. Every city, every town, every country, has its issues. And if you want to have an impact and learn how to have an impact, this is a great place to learn that process. We do have a question that came in here, and it says, with the research that you all conduct, how do you determine or evaluate if it's doing more good than harm? And if you realize collaborations, well, we'll just start there. How do you distinguish whether some of the research you're doing is doing more good than harm?
For me, it's being connected to members of the community, listening to them, taking their feedback. But it's also the give and take with your colleagues. Colleagues are critical. And if they don't think you're helping, and if they think you're harming, they'll let you know as well.
Yeah, I would add to that, and you know, you need to ask. You need to talk, you need to I'm trying to think of how to say this diplomatically, but like value the relationships that are really the most important and not the ones that will promote your career the most, if that makes sense. Like keep your feet on the ground and build into the process at every, you know, whether it's community engaged research, community engaged teaching, but build into that process opportunities for, you know, joint decision making and feedback, so that you, if you're making mistakes, if you're going about things the wrong way, that you are opening yourself up to hearing that and creating the space to hear it. So you have to, build that into your process.
And Tracy, this is a great question, by the way. You know, the way we try to think of it is, the way I interpret your question is sort of an equity lens to the work we do. And the way we look at it is you try to make equity central at the front end of a project, not something that's an add-on later. And so that would be, you build in the actual design of an intervention or a research project or even a course, how equity will be addressed. That might be having adequate sample sizes to be able to look at various subgroups who might be affected differently by an intervention. But really, too often in our research over the last several decades, equity or disparities has kind of been an add-on to, oh, we've got data we can analyze a different way, rather than designing the study or the project around that issue. And I think that's probably the most central thing, and that sort of layers on what both Vetta and Molly said.
Thank you. If you do find yourself in a community collaboration, regardless of the population identity group, and it's not going in the right direction, the second part of this question is, how do you respond? Maybe how do you change directions? How do you improve it? It sounds like you are advocating for a lot of that work being done on the front end, but as we know, plans are plans until we see them through and things shift. So what are your thoughts there?
For me, it's if you're working with community, it's about adaptability and flexibility. Up front, we build in communication processes so that we're constantly checking in. We have a way to take the temperature to see where people are, but we talk it out. And if we need to pivot, you pivot. But flexibility and adaptability.
I would just add, and I completely agree with Vetta here, but also the trust factor, you know, and not taking ourselves too seriously, and knowing that a lot of times the community, actually the ground truth within the community is one of the most important data pieces. They may not come out in the quantitative data or the numbers, but that sort of ground truth provided by the community is utmost important. And I think, you know, before we even do research within a community, I think trust up front, establishing expectations and sort of, you know, not only our expectations, but their expectations, and how we feed the information back to them and give them power, really citizen power, so that they can move things forward even after we're done with our research. And so I think it's building that trust, giving the community that buy-in and that power to help them be advocates for themselves in the future. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, I think one word you used, Sarah, was transparency, because I mean, the communities we're partnering with are not monolithic. There are debates within the community about what strategies will be most effective, what strategies are most pressing. We're all working on complicated social and health and economic problems, and people who like love each other dearly might disagree strongly about where you should start in solving those problems. So you can't make everybody happy, but at least if you're transparent in your process, like who has the power at this table? Who, you know, are we democratic, or did a grant decide this 5 years ago and now we're just going to do what we said we were going to do? You know, if you're transparent about that, I think people will respect it, even if everyone isn't happy all the time.
Thank you all so much. I know we have just a few minutes left, and so we should probably get ready to wrap up, because otherwise we'll find ourselves going into overtime. I just want to thank all of our faculty panelists for really dedicating time to share your experience, wisdom, and perspectives with our prospective students. Although I really shouldn't be surprised at your generosity, and I think, Sarah, you captured it well about the accessibility of our faculty. Also want to thank Admissions and Recruitment for putting together such a wonderful week. They truly are the A-team. And I know those of you who are going through the admissions process, if you're at this stage, I know, Phil, I see you, we've talked to, for the last couple of years. There's a few people out there that I recognize, but you know that they are constantly communicating and in touch with y'all. They have a wonderful week planned. And so there's a few more events that, quite a few more events that you definitely want to attend. If you have any questions, if you want to get connected with faculty, if you want to have connections with research centers or anything else during or after Admitted Students Week, make sure you email brownadmissions@wilstow.edu and they'll be able to connect you with all the appropriate people and get you all the answers. We do look forward, of course, if every single person that I wanted to come here showed up, the faculty would probably, fire me because it'd be overwhelming. But I think for those of you who realize that this is a great fit, and we do hope that we will see you in the fall as we continue to increase our time in person together and eventually fully back on campus at some point later next year. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you for your interest in our work. Thanks. Hopefully we meet you.
Yes, good luck, everyone.
Yep.
Let us know if you have questions or follow up.
Yep.
Indeed.